Hello everybody, Brad Johnson here. I know it's been quite some time since I've done a live broadcast on YouTube, but I'm very happy to be with you all here tonight. So we have a very exciting online free presentation that is going to be happening tonight. It is Adronis, the Fall of Atlantis. Now this is a presentation that I've wanted to do for quite some time, but I just wanted to find kind of like the right moment to do it. And so that right moment has come. And so Adronis is going to be coming through, and he's going to be sharing a perspective on Atlantis, about their fall, their downfall, how the Atlanteans had their own kind of way of life. There may also be a possibility of channeling the collective consciousness of Atlantis as well too, this evening as well. So we do have a live Q&A chat here. That you'll find right next to the video player on YouTube, and I will be taking live questions after the presentation tonight, so whether it's regarding Atlantis or anything else of that nature, that's fine. So everybody can participate. That's what this free presentation is all about this evening. And so for those of you who are tuning in who are not too sure who Adronis is, he again represents a higher aspect of myself, and so I will be bringing him through. And through this higher aspect, multi-dimensional, serious consciousness, known as Adronis, he'll be sharing some deep perspective as it relates to Atlantis. So Atlantis has had all kinds of research throughout hundreds of years, starting from Plato's accounts and through a lot of other independent researches as well too. And now we're just going to give a channeled perspective on Atlantis as well too tonight through Adronis, and again possibly the collective consciousness of Atlantis as well. So again, after the presentation is concluded, then I'll be taking in questions. So if you guys do have questions, I would suggest just writing them out, just getting them copied, and then once I get into Q&A, you can go ahead and paste them into the live chat, and then I'll be checking the live chat for any questions that we may have, that you guys may have for me or Adronis to answer. And so, looking on the screen now, we're seeing this incredible advanced civilization that existed many thousands of years ago and was basically just put to rest. And of course we have had no forms of mainstream science attempting to give answers about if this actual ancient civilization had existed, where it existed, why it existed, how it existed. And so as we're not getting those forms of answers through the mainstream media, we look into the alternatives. So we look into Plato's accounts, we look into Edgar Cayce, who has also talked about Atlantis as well. Again, we look at independent researchers. There's again a lot of talk about Antarctica being part of the remains of Atlantis as well. So there's a lot of questions that are looking to be answered, and again through a channeled source. This is only giving perspective. This is not going to give the 100% concrete answers as it relates to Atlantis itself. So I'm going to go ahead and get ready now to bring Adronis through. And again, thank you and hello everybody who is on the chat. I really appreciate you all being here tonight. And so I'm going to go ahead and bring Adronis in, and we'll get started with the Fall of Atlantis. Here we go. Get a glass of water before I get in there. Okay, here we go. Soul Star. Sirius. Adronis. We are here. At this time, we bid you greetings, and thank you very much for the opportunity of this interaction today. I am Adronis of Sirius, sending love, appreciation, and gratitude to all who are tuning in to this broadcast through your internet collective consciousness. What we would ask all of you to do at this time is simply allow yourselves to get relaxed, get comfortable, and tune in to the vibrations of Sirius, so that you may synchronize, harmonize, and align to all of the information that we have to share. Also understand that all that we shall provide this evening of your time is simply that of our perspective, our point of view. For all knowledge, all information, all creation itself resides within your very hearts, beings, and souls. There was once, a great deal of time ago, a great civilization upon your planet, to which the introduction to the talents, the skills, and the intelligence of man were truly demonstrated. Understand that Atlantis was not the first mankind civilization that existed, but it was the very first advanced technological civilization that was that of man. And throughout your earlier times prior to Atlantis, began the earlier versions of what you would know as the human being. From your Cro-Magnons, from much of your earlier Neanderthal archetypes, that therefore started to graduate past the primordial, primitive aspect of simply existing indigenously. That there were contacts, and that there was cohesion between the human race that existed upon that time. For the human race was indeed collected into different arrangements of civilizations, spanning throughout your North and South America, your Asia, your Europe, your Africa, all other civilizations, again existing very indigenously. And it was not until many of these civilizations started to come together and began to pool their resources, pool their intelligence, and create a collective utopia to that which Atlantis was. Atlantis had a great deal of free trade. Atlantis had a great abundance of agriculture. It had fertile land, and it was located in the heart of the Atlantic Ocean. Similar to the areas, but not exactly to, the area of that of the Caribbean, a little bit more off into the east. But it was quite a large landmass. In fact, if you were to put it all together, it would be somewhat close to the size of your own African continent, though in that sense just through different arrangements as it relates to width, length, and depth. And throughout this enormous continent existed harmony. Many sailors, many delegates from other lands sailed to Atlantis because it was an opportunity for the civilizations of Earth to come together, to share what they knew, to pool together their resources, their intelligences, and their wisdom, and created a spectacular era that represented the civilization of Atlantis. And so you could understand that much of the Atlanteans were really everybody upon the planet. There really was no specific race known as Atlanteans. Atlanteans were a mixture of different civilizations throughout the world at that time. This is why you have not really been able to discover a particular race that would represent the Atlantean themselves. They would represent the aspect of an age, of an era that came upon the planet. For your North Americans, your Central Americans, your South Americans, your Europeans, your Asians, your Africans, etc. All of them were Atlanteans. Those whom decided to participate. For this was a world idea. This was a multi-civilization inception to bring forward Atlantis, to take all of the great knowledge of the West and the East and making it centralized. This is why when you look at the world, to where you understand the West and to where you understand the East, Atlantis was dead center. And that was its nature, was to be the central hub to all that represent the ancient civilizations, the civilizations that existed upon Earth at that time. And so, through much of the intelligence and collective wisdom and collective contribution, through all the civilizations at that time, Atlantis became a construct. For there were mighty temples, for there were mighty pyramids, homes as far as the eye could see, abundance, fertile land as far as the eye could see. Not only did humanity cooperate with Atlantis as a community, but so did certain members of your own inner Earth civilizations, where they too came to the surface. They were seeing how humanity was getting along and were very pleased to see this. And they too allowed offerings to be given to Atlantis. And that these very offerings from the Fae, from the inner Earth Fae, represented that of advanced crystal technology. And the crystals that were used in the inner Earth were therefore protruding themselves throughout the surface of Atlantis. And that yes, you could indeed see that the central hub of Atlantis did appear very crystal-like, very much like a crystalline city. And that these crystals that were brought forward through the inner Earth, through the Fae, were therefore contributed to man. And saying, use this wisely. Use this with goodness in your hearts. Let humanity become abundant and fruitful in all the sharing that it can give to make it a unified civilization existing here on planet Earth. And so gifts were given to the Atlanteans. And it was indeed a golden age. There was much prosperity. Everybody was working together with themselves, and primarily Atlantis in its earlier times was completely governed by feminine rule, which means that there were sisterhood councils. There were Maya that again existed under sisterhoods, and it was the women themselves that were actually keeping Atlantis in a state of peace, and in that sense a harmonious utopia. And of course, throughout many hundreds and even many thousands of years, Atlantis continued to prosper, for it was indeed a Garden of Eden. And as it was a Garden of Eden, it consisted in that to which you would know as the fourth density. When we look at the planet Mars, Mars itself was raided by war, ravaged by war, and that the destruction of Mars was indeed catastrophic. And through much of the internal wars that Mars had, they made many enemies. And they had completely destroyed their world because of the aspect of empires, of corruption, of the conquering mind of mentality. And that Mars itself was at the brink of complete destruction, where anything upon the surface could be barely livable. And so, to save the 3 million plus population that existed underground, due to a great amount of warfare that happened throughout throughout hundreds of years, in fact, there was that of the Confederation that came to the world and saw that the entire civilization, human populace of Mars, that again were also representative that of Meldeck, were at the brink of extinction. In order to save the populace, they would need to be transported off of Mars and come to Earth. And so they were seized, they were taken off of Mars, as they too were requesting help to leave this planet and migrate elsewhere. They were then picked up and they were deposited upon the earth, upon the area that was utopian in nature. The Confederation's thinking was that, look how well Earth is prospering. Look at how all the people are getting along with each other. This is exactly what these men, the Aryans, need to come to Earth and to help them shift their ways. That was the mentality. They therefore deposited them upon Earth, and they were even telling them, the gods are bringing brethren to you. New brethren that will help you to advance your culture. Help them, guide them, and you will work together just as what you have done with Atlantis. And so therefore, the 3 million plus Aryans from Mars came upon Atlantis. And they were, of course, very, very distraught, losing their original world, but then were greeted with a great deal of love, a great deal of compassion from the Atlanteans. And for quite some time it appeared that there was peace. But as many of the leaders and rulers that once existed upon Mars started to look around at Atlantis and saying, well, look at all this prosperity. Look at how everybody is getting along with each other. There doesn't seem to be any type of rulership. There's no emperor. There's no king. This could be something that we would be able to help with. And through bit by bit, small portions at a time, throughout your span of, again, several years, many of the Aryans attempted to bring themselves into council, basically through the analogy of wolves in sheep's clothing, that they attempted to become saints, and said that if there was rulership, this is what would allow Atlantis to begin to become more prosperous. Look at what Atlantis is. It's an empire. Everybody upon the planet is aware of Atlantis. Do you have any idea about what you have all created here? It needs rulership in order for it to prosper further. And so, many of them started to go through the ranks, as it were, started to create certain sanctions where order was therefore being established. And through this order that was being established, there was this mentality that was starting to grow. They basically felt that Atlantis needed to be protected, that no one should attempt to dirty its name. For again, there were other civilizations across the planet at the time, and they did not want to have any particular part of Atlantis, and it was believed that if they could tell that Atlantis itself needed to be protected, then that way that would be the slow rise to power. And many of these were the priesthoods that existed upon Mars, along with their own king. And so as the king started to flourish and start to slowly and surely uproot themselves into the internal structures of Atlantis, Atlantis started to change. There was the idea that people needed to work. There was the idea of the introduction to classes, to ranks, to privileges, and that anybody who was not behind Atlantis was seen as a traitor and should therefore be executed. If there was anything that soiled Atlantis' name, dirtied Atlantis' name, dirtied everything that these people worked hard for, that should be met with capital punishment. And so, much of the corruption started very, very slowly. It was the aspect of the shadow broadcasting itself throughout the heart of Atlantis. And even to the idea that there should also be male councils, that there should be brotherhoods and not just sisterhoods upon Atlantis. It should be fair. It should be equal. There should be male and female councils. There should be brotherhoods and sisterhoods, when at the time it was simply sisterhoods. And so, again, through much of the petitions and much of the noise that they made, they discovered that, yes, there was now more of an entry to where the brotherhoods were able to be part of the Maya. As this continued further and further, the aspect of the sisterhood was becoming less and less involved, or less and less important as it relates to the masculine brotherhood of the Maya. And then, of course, there were opportunities that came about that were attempting to make Atlantis a military power. And much in regards to the high priesthoods objected to this. This was not the purpose of Atlantis. Atlantis was not meant to become a military power. It was not meant to enforce. It was a Tower of Babel. It was that represented unification upon the planet. Oh, you don't know what you're talking about. There are civilizations all around that are jealous of Atlantis's progress, that are jealous of what Atlantis has become because they couldn't do it themselves. You don't understand. There are those who would want to cause war with us, and it's time to bring the spirit of Atlantis all throughout the world to share in prosperity with the rest of the world. Does this sound familiar? Well, that is exactly what's happened as it relates to Atlantis. That again, they would start to build military might, and they would go to other areas of the world and basically establishing colonies, to again feeling that they were of progress and they were attempting to help the rest of the world in a militarized fashion. Not only was that taking place, but there was also looting of ancient vaults that were considered to be very, very sacred, that contained that of extraterrestrial technology, attempting to reverse engineer any particular type of technology and use it to Atlantis's means. Then, of course, there was much of the scrutiny relating to that of the crystal technology, to which Atlantis itself received. For you did have what you would know as hovercrafts, or levitation-based conveyances, that were prosperous throughout Atlantis. In fact, many of these hovercrafts were able to go at fantastic speeds and were able to cover the entirety of the Earth without any particular form of, shall we say, dirty fuel. It was all powered through the power of crystal, through the heart of the Earth, through the energy of your planet. But the crystals were being looked at a lot more. How could they be weaponized? How could they be militarized? We wanted to look into that, said the Atlanteans. We also wanted to create a much more advanced alchemy scientific division, which means it was time to start developing new types of soldiers. New types of soldiers that were part human and part animal. Chimeras, in the best way to put it. And so there were alchemical experiences, repeating about what happened on Mars as it relates to chimeras as well too. To where human and animal DNA was being mixed to create a new type of species. And so this happened. And this goes back much into your ancient Greek myths as it relates to part human, part animal creatures. These too were being created. And so genetic laboratories, alchemy centers, alchemy temples were being created in secret to basically utilize the aspect of transmutation in alchemy through the aspect of what you could also term as black magic being done to create abominable creatures. And that the intention was that these would be super soldiers. That they would go to lands and they would basically clear up the battlefield. And that they would remain as these particular servants to their creators. Hence the new Atlantean Empire. And so Atlantis became an empire. This did not go unnoticed by the gods, as we will term them. That the gods or the game masters came to the high rulers of Atlantis and said, you must stop what you are doing. You have already seen 2 other catastrophes that have taken place upon Atlantis. Use of ill will. That has triggered earthquakes, that has triggered floods, that has triggered intense earth changes. And this is where Atlantis, again, had 2 previous disasters at the time to which the Aryans came upon the planet, and that they therefore gave a prediction. If Atlantis would not stop, they would meet their end. And that the high rulers, the elitists, upon Atlantis at that time said, "Do you intend to do this to us? Do you intend to destroy a people that spent so much time working to make a harmonized, unified civilization like Atlantis possible? You would dare to destroy us?" There was no answer. And so, Atlantis was preparing for war. Their intention was to destroy the gods themselves, and basically creating more of these super weapons to destroy everybody above the earth that were again seen as the gods, the game masters. And so there was again further division happening throughout Atlantis. What was once a very, very peaceful land, ripe and beautiful in cooperation and community, was turning into a dualistic war zone, to where much of Atlanteans' own people started to rebel, started to riot, started to fight other officials. And again, you could say that there was an equivalence to what you would know as martial law that took place upon Atlantis as well. But again, the madness, the chaos, did not stop there. For again, the crystals were being utilized to create weaponry. And that these crystals themselves were basically being combined to create a new type of weapon, even greater than what you would know as your own atomic bomb. And this was therefore the intention of the Atlanteans, that they would use the grid system that was therefore being created upon the earth to channel the energy together to create an incredible weapon that they would attempt to detonate in outer space, and attempt to destroy many of the gods stationed in the above orbits. However, this weapon backfired. Upon their time of being able to detonate the device, it led to the single-handed destruction of their own people, to where an incredible graviton bomb type intensity was therefore delivered. It was Atlantis destroying itself. And this is what led to a single day and a single night, Atlantis plummeting underneath the ocean, but not all of it. Again, only a small portion of it, to which was detonated through the aspect of the crystal energy weapon device. And through this incredible explosion, actually caused mud and water to mix together. The sea floor and water mixing together, and crashed upon many of the surrounding areas that was existing around the land of Atlantis at that time. And this is indeed what created much of the deserts upon your planet upon this time as well, such as with what happened to Egypt, to where it was once lush and beautiful. It therefore fell victim to this incredible tidal wave. Many, shall we say, dozens of feet tall, covered with both water and mud, and therefore saturated all of Egypt with much of the sand of the sea floor caused by this destruction that landed upon Egypt for it to be the desert that it is today. Atlantis itself, in regards to its rulership, was destroyed within the blink of an eye. And that those who were able to survive, those in that sense who represented the kings, the priesthoods of Atlantis, therefore began to migrate to Egypt and again create the empire there. And then, of course, migrating to Samaria, eventually creating the Roman Empire, and much more. Those were all part of the descendants of the survivors, the kings, the priesthoods of Atlantis, that continued to scourge much of the land throughout the continuing eras that processed itself after the destruction of this once great land. The aspect and remains of Atlantis after the cataclysm, therefore did, yes, become that of what you would know as Antarctica. Over many hundreds of years of planetary shifts and of changes, the land started to move itself into the southern polar area, covered more so with ice. But again, this too also represented that of a voluntary ice age that took place, to which Atlantis had frozen over. Again, more experimentations that were being taken place upon the land, to where much of the ancient technologies were present upon that land and attempting to be seized. Therefore, a war was breaking out. Cold fusion, ice age, voluntarily created, therefore freezing much of the land, and therefore descending it into the southern polar area of your planet. This is again what represented the fall of Atlantis. So everything that we have shared in this broadcast with all of you, this moment of your time, is not the entirety of what has happened, but it is a summary. It is an overview. For what we have shared with all of you must be understood through your own truths. We do not carry all of the knowledge for you. We are only giving a version, a perspective, to what has been shared throughout your culture, throughout much in regards to what had taken place upon a once beautiful society filled with community and cooperation. And we are stating again that this will happen to your race. That through the descendants from 4th density to 3rd density caused humanity to shift downwards, for humanity was originally aligned as a 4th density race. And that through much of this peril, through much of this destruction and warfare, actually plummeted down a dimension. Why? Simply because Earth itself inverted. When Atlantis was basically taking advantage of much of the crystals, the crystal weaponry, that was being retracted back into the Earth to prevent any further usage of any other civilization that tried to use the energy of the Earth as a weapon. And so they were retracted back into the inner Earth, never to be given to humanity again, not into their current version of what they represented as themselves. They were therefore cut off from the magic. And because they were cut off from the magic, they again attempted to utilize their own physical dominant ends to punish those who oppose their empires through the means of black magic, quite commonly, and through alchemy practices that were being preserved throughout the destruction of Atlantis. And so, from this 4th density to 3rd density plunge, to where everything was being inverted back into the Earth, to where 4th density only existed within the internal aspect of Earth, and the 3rd density was existing in a completely different dimension, much more physical, much more solid, much more rigid. And this is what you are now starting to surpass, starting to move past again. An opportunity to once again return to the Garden of Eden, to which that of the 4th density represents. We will now take a moment to adjust the frequency, to adjust the alignment, to communicate with the collective consciousness of Atlantis, and that through the collective consciousness of Atlantis, they will share much of their own perspective to what had taken place that led to the demise of the Atlantean civilization. One moment, please, as we adjust the frequency. Through the wisdom of the ancestors, through the wisdom of the great elders, we commune with you in this time period. We wish for you to know that the spirit of Atlantis still exists within all of your hearts. We wish for you to know that all of you that are present here listening to these words have the soul of Atlantis still beating through your hearts, still alive within your body. For many of you have been there. Many of you, when you look very deeply into yourselves, saw the destruction, saw the heartbreak of what was the single greatest disaster in the history of the earth that took place. For we were indeed arrogant, for we were indeed naive. We allowed control, feeling that it would better our society, to wreak havoc, to end relationships that we have made with much of the world, to wage war, all to protect that which was never done before. And many of us who were alive in form of incarnation, upon the ripeness to where Atlantis once flourished, take responsibility for such naivety. For much of our fathers trusted us in helping to restore brothers that were lost in the brinks of war, to help them come upon this planet, and for us to help them, to nurture them back to health. And therefore we were met with betrayal. For it is no more different than what has happened throughout much of our indigenous brothers, throughout your North America, who therefore attempted to welcome in the Pilgrims, welcome in the Spanish, and therefore met a similar end to how many of us did. For it was warfare at the greatest degree. If you were to imagine your First and Second World Wars combined, that would equal somewhat to the intensity of what took place around the fall of Atlantis. For there were other cataclysms. There was Earth speaking to us, telling us that she was very displeased with how Atlantis was transforming itself into rulership, and that this led to great cataclysms, floods, earthquakes, volcanoes that erupted across the land, and we all saw the prophecies that this was bringing. Stop what you are doing. We therefore did not listen. We saw ourselves as the gods. We were better than they were. And we wanted to fight for our own independency. And that could not be done. The aspect of son cannot overthrow the father. And we thought that we could. And it was in the arrogance, and it was in the ignorance, that Atlantis therefore fell in the way that it did. For we did indeed deserve our fate. And we will never question that. But what we say to much of our human brothers and sisters upon the earth right now is to learn from your history, is to learn from your mistakes. For we as a people made many mistakes. And of course, much in regards to our records, our historical monuments, everything that represented our people is not available to you commonly. For we have spoke with many of your mentors, those who are able to commune with spirit, to speak to us, and then in some way they have shared elements of what has taken place upon Atlantis as a means to helping you learn what not to do. We will say that much in regards to how your Civilization has prospered throughout these decades, throughout this modern era. It's really no more different than what happened to Atlantis as well. We too were quite fascinated with technology. We too were quite fascinated by having political leadership and by also having the monetary industry. It got us nowhere. We also had great military. It got us nowhere. It led further and further into our end. We do not want that to happen to our descendant children. We ask all of you, not just what you are hearing now through this voice, but through many others who are sharing their perspective into the ancient societies, the ancient civilizations of this earth, to research this, to see this for yourselves, to understand what not to do. For Atlantis once represented the greatest unification as a human culture on this planet, and was therefore changed in a very short amount of time in comparison. Because again, we became arrogant. We do not wish that for our children. We do not wish that for our descendants. We can only pray. We can only send love that you will all choose paths towards the Creator. That you will choose paths to the Father, and not feeling that the Son is greater than the Father, or the daughter is greater than the mother. You must understand that it is humility. It is love. It is the compassion that you all hold that builds a true empire, an empire of peace. And that is our reminder to all of you. Not to fight your fellow man, not to come to odds with your fellow brothers, your brethren, your sisters, but cooperation, working together. As we have said, you're walking down the exact same path as Atlantis did, that led to its destruction. We do not want to see you destroyed. However, that may be the fate for many of you. For those who are unwilling to change and return to life in its grandest degree, where soul and heart and love is the true currency, that is what is needed for a prosperous civilization. We are not saying this to scare any of you, but you are moving upon that path to once we had that path in our sights as well. Do not let anything own you. Do not let anything control you. Remember the power that you have to shape your destiny as a human being, but also as a god. For it is what you are. You are God's children, and God is the Father. And you all have the deepest of love that can change this world together. But that is what it takes. We have learned from this. And many other civilizations after us have learned this and are attempting to teach this through their hearts that come through the time periods, through the souls that are still among you. For many of you were these ancient messengers. Many of you were these ancient sages, yogis, practitioners that shared great messages of love. And that time has come again for you to continue to preach, to continue to share, to tell about the wisdom that those of us whose mistakes we have made offer new teachings that will offer a light, illuminating your path into prosperity. And so we, as your parents, as your forefathers, wishing the love of our children, our descendants, all around this beautiful world, to take in what is important, to live as your truth, to learn to discern what is good from evil, to know that there are indeed wolves in sheep's clothing, and that they will promise you the world. They will promise you that you can have everything as long as you obey them. And this is the greatest deception. Please listen to your hearts. Please follow the voice that exists inside, that cannot be perturbed by any form of bargain that causes you to sell your soul. Because that is indeed what happened to many of us. And we want to educate our children on what not to do and to live the proper way. And the proper way is followed with love. We will now completely conclude this interaction through this voice. Our hearts, our souls, our being are one. Lakatekacha. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you to Adronis and to the Atlantean Collective Consciousness. That was very, very interesting. So a lot of really great information there. I'm sure it's a good thing that this is being recorded so we can look back to it. I was only getting kind of glimpses of understanding what was being talked about, so I definitely have to look back at it as well too. So again, I want to thank everybody who's joining me on the broadcast tonight. It was a very, very interesting perspective from both Adronis and the Collective Consciousness of Atlantis. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and tune into the live chat right now. So if anybody here has any questions based on what was discussed tonight, Adronis is still available. So if you guys do have questions specifically for Adronis, just make sure you mention Adronis in your chat. And I'm just going to kind of go up the chat here and see what questions are here. Okay, so I'm just going to go down. There's quite a bit of feedback here. And there's, of course, the question, why don't we learn about Atlantis in our history books? Why are they hiding this history? Well, because basically, if we understand the type of civilization that Atlantis is, everything relating to our modern science would be thrown out the window, right? The idea of them using crystal technology, the idea that they were very much in contact with extraterrestrials, the idea that they had levitation, that they had these incredible forms of technology, conveyances and great conveniences that surpassed everything that we use today. Those forms of scientists creating those textbooks, all of those textbooks would be thrown out the window. In fact, every way of life would be changed. And for those who are attempting to administer control on this planet, that would be a doomsday scenario for them, right? So if you're learning about a civilization that is far, far more advanced than even we are today, that's going to create an incredible discord between much of their modern principles and modern sciences. So this is exactly the reason why they have kept it buried. They don't want people learning that there was an even greater civilization existing tens of thousands of years ago, even more advanced than how we are today, right? That would definitely cause a big kink in their chain, right? So, gonna keep going down here on the chat. Here's one. Does the modern royal family know of the Atlantean connection in history? I would imagine so, because basically if you're looking at their incarnations of the royal family, they would most likely have a high priesthood or even a rulership back into the times of Atlantis, right? Basically having those connections. So I would most certainly think so. Let's just go down the list a bit more. So here's one from, again, BB hashtag. What's the answer, Adronis, if Syrians had their go at the current Earth systems, if you will? What did get you into betterment? Okay, one moment. We thank you very much for your question. If we were to look at Earth relating to everything that you have gone through, you must understand that many civilizations go through their own dark nights of the soul. We too had dark nights of the soul in ancient times. We too were attempting to decide whether to be involved with a galaxy strongly at war, or being able to retreat and look into how we could personally connect back to the Creator, to forge ourselves as messengers to help the galaxy. So yes, we too have had similar situations of dark times, to where many of our people in the ancient times were therefore being corrupted by the idea of war, that in order for us to have peace, we needed to fight for it. It was nowhere as dualistic or in a high contrast as Earth, but it was something that we all had to go through. And many of us chose the path to enlightenment. That love was indeed the answer. Because we also learned from mentors, just as you did. And that through everything that you have gone through Earth, you must go through these trying times to reach a higher state of revelation. One moment. And so, it is important that you are learning from your history, not as something saying, oh my goodness, this is so horrible, how could this possibly happen, and become so involved with the melodrama of the experience, but being able to learn from it, to realize and recognize the patterns. You all may know that when you see black storm clouds heading your way, that it is indeed going to be a storm. You know that because you see it upon the horizon. Well, the same thing goes as it relates to looking into your history and seeing common patterns that may be on the horizon. Before that storm hits you, make the changes so that that storm can redirect itself. That's the important thing here. You all have the ability to redirect the storm. You have all the ability to change the outcome of anything that you wish. And that the aspect of betterment comes not from the state of ridicule and not to the state of judgment, but looking into what has taken place, learning from it, and discovering what you prefer through what you have witnessed that you don't prefer. That is what we have done. Not through the idea of violence or retaliation or fighting fire with fire, but being able to understand the patterns of what is attempting to be repeated here, learning from those patterns, and averting the aspect of the upcoming storm. It is that which produces betterment. We thank you very much. Okay. So let's go ahead and move down the list here. So we got quite a bit of comments here, so this is great work. Thank you everybody for such great interaction here tonight. Here's one here from Logan. Thank you so much. Adronis, was the Atlantean age related to the astrological age and or archetype of Cancer? What is the relationship between the upcoming age of Aquarius and Atlantis? Well, we thank you very much for your question. As it relates to ages, that would be a differentiation, as there are, shall we say, somewhat conflicts pertaining to exactly when the exact time to which Atlantis itself existed. And again, that is, shall we say, strewn about through much of your own research and those who are discovering it. Many people have felt that Atlantis existed approximately at its end 8,500 years ago, or perhaps even 10,000 years ago, or perhaps even again 12,500 to 13,000 years ago. And so there were basically other different eras that intersect in that particular arena. When you're looking at the aspect of an age of Aquarius, you're looking into the idea of indeed a new dawning, an upliftment period in that way. Whereas what we can say is that, not to offend any particular scholar that may be uncertain of the age at that time, that was time of descent. That was the idea of returning more to the physical, going back into the roots of the garden, taking the seeds and replanting everything one at a time as the old falls through superficiality. And that is the age to which it represented. The Aquarian age that many of you refer to, entering into the Age of Aquarius, is all about upliftment. Is about being able to represent that Aquarius is that of an air sign, and that you are lifting yourselves up. You are moving yourselves into a likeness, because you have seen throughout the ages how there has been all of these seeds and all of these roots therefore being exposed, and new seeds being planted within its place to grow new fruit, to create new opportunity. But again, needing to go back to the soil, needing to go back into the times of the earth, and that's a hint, and being able to replant everything as you take all that which represents that of debris, of toxicity, and remove it from your soil, so that seeds can be planted, and so that the air can therefore uplift these new creations, and you therefore become the upliftment of the gods, moving yourselves into further understanding of your intuition, of your mastery from within self, to become that of the very gods you have always been looking for. We thank you. Okay, so let's move on. So just give me a moment here, guys. I'm just reading some more questions here. Okay, so I'm just going to try and see if I can find somebody who hasn't asked a question yet. Maybe I have to scroll up a little bit more. Okay, well, there's a couple people that are just asking repeat questions, so I'm just seeing if I can find somebody who hasn't asked a question yet. Okay, Adronis, were the Atlanteans the founders of the Argothan network? And this is asked by Felipe. Okay, one moment. We thank you very much, Felipe, for your question. No, the Atlanteans were not the founders of the Argothan network, for indeed, the aspect of what you term as Agatha has been around since the very beginning, since the times of the first settlers that came upon your planet. But you have to understand, firstly, Earth is a ward planet for humanity. Now, let us reiterate that a little bit more. Humanity's original planet, to which they were indigenous to, existed in the constellation of Lyra. After that planet was destroyed, many of you were homeless. You were refugees, and you have spent many, many millions of years going to other worlds as wards and attempting to develop yourselves, which means humanity, much of those whose genes you share within your own, were wayward races, were, shall we say, breakaway civilizations. They were wards, which means planets adopted them. Because of much of the warfare and the destruction of many different worlds from many different forms of sub-races of human beings, many of you were homeless and you were refugees. This is why humanity has only been part of this earth for a certain amount of time, between that of what you would know as no more than around 300,000 years. And around that time you have functioned as stewards. You have functioned as stewards that have come here to help along with the earth, to prosper alongside of her, because she adopted you. The aspect of the earth and the entire star system as you know it is insectoid territory. This is why, again, when you look at the earth, you see that indeed much of the earliest forms of life that were working together with the plant kingdom were insects. And that is exactly what this earth represents. It is the property of insectoid races. And you can basically find insectoid races upon every single sphere existing within this star system, plus other spheres that you're not even aware of that exist within the Oort cloud, to which they are also that of Earth-like planets. And so this is all jurisdiction here. An agreement was made with many of the insectoid councils, shall we say, to bring humanity, to bring an experiment forward within this star system. In exchange, the aspect of the insectoid races would be able to conduct genetic experiments through the social experiment that represented the human race, beginning with Maldek, continuing on Mars, continuing on Earth. And that there would be overseers to this grand experiment that would not be directly involved, that too were human, and you could see those as the Venusians. The Venusians, again, were very much the overseers to this experiment, overseeing much of this, as they again held an ambassadorship, helping out much of the races to work together with genetics, to work together with the planets that were willing to offer themselves in contribution to this grand exchange that was taking place that involved many different races. And this is again why you have 22 different extraterrestrial races within your own genome. It is through the contribution amount that have been brought forward. But yes, Earth itself is indeed a grand experiment, a social experiment. In fact, if you were to go to other worlds, they would not exist at all like Earth does. Through the idea of so much programming and so much technology that was basically manipulating reality, that you feel that all of this of physical reality is all there is. Planets out there, as we would say, don't exist in that way. That's why Earth is such a rare jewel. No other civilization that we know of exists anything like the human race does here. And that's what's so different about this. So, the indigenous population of this planet, which is what you would know as your future selves that have come back into the ancient past to dwell here, would represent the earlier pioneers to that which eventually formed the Argothan network. The Argothan network, again, is just a type of hierarchy. And we do mean the word hierarchy because some are into rule. And that they all work together in certain levels of truces. For there have been certain inner earth conflicts in your ancient past. But they would represent the indigenous people. They would represent much of the sentient races that came here in the earlier times, way, way before humanity dawned upon this planet. Humanity is not indigenous. Humanity is not responsible for any ancient civilizations that have existed upon this planet. It's actually quite the opposite. It's the aspect that many, many ancient civilizations upon this planet are responsible for opening up a space for humanity to be here and to share in the cooperation of allowing humanity to evolve in the way that the cyclic plan allows. We thank you very much for your question. Okay. So what Adronis is talking about was shared in the previous presentation I did called Adronis the Primordial Human. If you guys have not seen that yet, it is now available on newearthacademy.online. So you can go to patreon.com/newearthacademy and you can find it there. And again, feel free to take a look at New Earth Academy. It is up and running. There will be some classrooms coming. There's some really great offers on the site as well too. So that's newearthacademy.online. Okay. Sandy asks here, wasn't it peaceful before the Mars people came and said we needed a ruler? Is that what was said? It was a time of peace, yes, absolutely. From what I'm remembering, from what Adronis was saying, is that Atlantis started off as a very, very peaceful, kind of like utopian civilization, but it wasn't just one civilization that was responsible for it. It was the idea of the entire world coming together. In fact, we could understand that the aspect of the crystal skulls were indeed part of an Atlantean conceptualization as a means of peace from masters from all over the world that got together to share that of knowledge from their own ancestry wisdom contained inside the 13 crystal skulls, to which was originally derived in Atlantis to indicate the peace and prosperity that existed upon that land in the times of ancient past. It's when the Aryans came in from Mars to Earth that's when things were starting to go downhill. Just like the repeating of our history from, again, how the Pilgrims came upon North America and how they created genocide to the Native Americans, right? The exact same thing in that state of history, right? Very, very disturbing, but again, that's what's taken place. Okay. So we're probably going to take maybe about 2 or 3 more questions here, guys, and then we're probably going to wrap it up tonight. Oops. Okay, let me just go down to the bottom here. Okay, One World Society asks, I've read on a psychic blog that Atlantis was saved and preserved and exists in another plane, and that there have been accounts where people have seen it floating in the sky. Is this true? I couldn't tell you, you know. There's a lot of things that are indeed handing out, or sorry, not handing out, but basically a lot of things that are taking place. A lot of things that are perhaps even shifting in between dimensions. We may also be looking at another parallel Earth where what is floating in the sky is perhaps one of our own cities in that time that may represent that feeling of Atlantis. I personally have not heard of anything of what you speak taking place, and there have been a lot of conversations that Adronis has had with a lot of people, even conversations that I've had with others regarding Atlantis. I've never heard of anything about it existing in another plane. It almost reminds me of Stargate Atlantis, right? You know, where they go to the Pegasus galaxy and then they have Atlantis there. It sounds like kind of a concept coming from that. So to my knowledge, it has not been preserved in that way. The only thing that's close to the preservation would be like Antarctica, right? Because Antarctica was once part of the landmass of Atlantis, and that there is indeed a lot of technology. There's also rumors again of dead alien bodies there as well too, and ancient technology there, ancient pyramids there as well too. So I would imagine that if there was preservation, you would most likely look towards Antarctica for that altogether. But I have not heard of anything about Atlantis floating in the sky or salvaged from another plane in that particular way. So that would be news to me, and that's all I can share about it. Okay. Someone asked, Adronis, tell us about the destruction of Marduk and Tiamat. Guys, that would take an entire new 2-hour presentation to do that. But actually, there is already a video that you can find on my YouTube channel called Adronis, A Perspective of Maldek. Okay, and you can find out more about that there. So go to my YouTube channel. I have over 700 videos. There's a lot there, right? So just type in Adronis Maldek, right? And you'll get a perspective from what Adronis has shared relating to Maldek or Marduk or Tiamat. Okay. Okay, so probably 1 or 2 more questions here, guys, and we'll wrap it up. Yeah, Sandy asks, did Argotha take crystals back, or are they still hidden? They basically have reverted themselves into inner Earth. So this is why there's a lot of testimonies. Like even when I connected with the Delphi used crystal technology, just like how the Atlanteans did in that way. Of course, there's Corey Good's testimony. I know he's kind of a mixed bag, but there's testimony with him and the Anshar as it relates to their usage of crystal technology as well too. So to my knowledge, it is existing in a 4th density realm. It's kind of like a membrane has been surrounded between the surface and between much of the inner civilizations as well too, and that even includes the Fey realms as well too. Is that the Fey realms are basically the realms of magic, and they're surrounded by this kind of web-like membrane, right, that exists between the worlds. And so we have the Argothan civilizations of the inner Earth, which are Fey in their own way as well too, and they have the fairies, the fairy kingdom, the fairyland, that also exist in a membrane, where the 4th density Earth also exists. So there are certainly usages of the crystal technology, as we can call it that, throughout the Argothan network and through the Fey realms, through the fairyland in that way. Humanity, as I currently understand it, does not have access to it, but I have no doubt that there will indeed be keymakers that will be incarnating on this planet and that are already here, and actually being able to introduce about how we can actually access this energy. So I would refer to them as key makers, simply because they're making the keys and they're opening up these locks to where these membranes are held and holding it in place. So I do feel that there will be people that are coming in time that will talk more about this crystal technology and perhaps how it can even be accessed past the membrane that guards it right now. Okay, so that's what I can share about it. Here's an interesting one from Copula. Sorry, I'm not sure if I can pronounce your name, but when will we know as a people what is buried beneath the Sphinx paws in Giza? It's not to say that there isn't something known that's there. It's just that we haven't been able to access it. Basically, when we're looking under the right paw of the Sphinx, we're looking at something that is so heavily guarded and may have actually used alchemy and even spell work to keep it sealed, which means if you are a premature person that tries to go into that vault and try to open it, you'll probably be landed with a curse, right? So there's a lot of magic, alchemy work that is done through that particular vault. To my knowledge, it's even very, very hard to remote view inside that vault. It's very, very well protected. So I would say a lot of the ancient alchemists and ancient mages of Egypt and perhaps even Atlantis sealed that away. And all that is known is that it is a collection of different forms of knowledge from all over the world that may have also talked about Atlantis, Lemuria, earlier colonies on the planet, maybe technology, a lot about humanity's origins as well, but it's locked up, and it's only going to be opened when a certain one comes along that matches the vibration and has the knowledge to actually open that vault. To my knowledge, I'm sure many people are aware that there is a vault underneath the right paw of the Sphinx, and I am also very aware that no one can really access it except for those ones who will be appointed with the knowledge to actually being able to do so. I don't know when that will happen, but I don't imagine it'll be too much longer to wait. Okay? All right, one more question, guys, and we're going to wrap up tonight. Okay, here's a good one from David. David asks, what is the purpose of the crystal skulls? Also, can Adronis please discuss anything, if possible, on what is known to be a galactic prophecy? Okay. Well, I'll cover the crystal skulls part, and Adronis can come through and he can talk about galactic prophecy in that way. So the crystal skulls were created by many of these kind of emissaries, these great ancestors, these great masters. And I believe it was created around the times of Atlantis, and it may have been during the times to where it was at pre-destruction. And that these 13 crystal skulls were created, and that they were kind of like simultaneously aware of each other, these masters that came together. And there were masters of many different forms of descendants and ethnicities around the planet. And that crystal skulls are created to consciously maintain wisdom from their own master or creator. So a master or creator will go into their own trance states, and they will be able to access the crystalline matrix of the crystal skull. And they'll be able to imbue part of their own life force into that crystal skull. And they'll be able to preserve all of that knowledge that would not get wrecked or destroyed through the wearings of time. And so these crystal skulls were very, very well protected. They were often kept very much closely to those who had perhaps religious authority, or again a great means to keep it safe. And so they were passed down from generation to generation, like through tribes, through elders, etc. And much of the knowledge of that master contributed part of their life force to that crystal skull. And so those that the master appointed to be appropriate would actually connect to that particular person who was that ambassador, and they would actually go into a trance state. And then that particular ambassador or host would therefore, in this trance state, actually be able to share information that would therefore be scribed down to certain civilizations that would again continue down the ages. So to my knowledge, I feel that the original crystal skulls have not actually been introduced to the public. There have been talks about people who have one of the 13 crystal skulls. I find that very difficult to believe. They are very much kept safe. My feeling would be probably in the Middle East or perhaps even South America, or they could even be divided. But I feel that there's some very noteworthy and trustworthy elders that are looking after them and making sure that they are not falling into the public's hands. So for those who have talked about that they have the original crystal skulls, again, I find that very, very doubtful. These are very, very protected. They're very, very on guard in that way. They're kept very much on guard. to prevent any particular forms of intrusions to destroying them or contaminating their energies, right? But again, these 13 masters were all part, I feel, of the Atlantean culture at that time, to preserve knowledge, to being able to know that perhaps a lot of their history would be destroyed, it would be unretrievable, and that they needed to create these crystal skulls, come together in this way, and being able to share and preserve this knowledge for the future civilizations and generations that were to come. That would be my understanding of it. Okay. And so the second question was for if Adronis knows anything about a galactic prophecy. Okay. So let me take a moment to connect with Adronis and see what he says. One moment. We thank you very much for your question. While we would say that there is not a galactic prophecy, but there are many galactic prophecies, and one of them do relate to that of yourselves, is that the galactic prophecy calls for the idea that the planets that hold physical life will eventually have no such endeavor occurring upon it through experimentation. That the planets will eventually evolve, that they will become beings, and that life as you know it will transcend to a much more stronger capacity of unity and oneness together. That it does predict that of an end to the era of separation, and that there will indeed be a split between one galaxy and another, one universe and another, and that that which continues to encourage separation will no longer be appointed into existing throughout that which has chosen oneness to exist. And that is what is taking place. This is one of the great galactic prophecies, and it has been predicted for millions and millions of years, that there will come a point to where humanity, to where your brethren and sisters of the stars will come together knowing each other as one. That when you go to a world, there is no such thing as disconnection. We would say that Earth is actually one of the last holdouts for that. And that when Earth actually transcends into its new density formation, that this will mean the end of a separation consciousness. And that this will represent the beginning times to where a tide will start to wash across the galaxy, and every single being upon this galaxy existing in such a domain will understand their uniqueness and oneness to the Creator. That is one of the galactic prophecies, and we could refer to that as the prophecy of oneness. So, that is one of many galactic prophecies that are indeed present that we are aware of. We thank you very much. We thank all of you for the opportunity of this interaction. We will now conclude and return to the conduit. We will speak to you again, as now is forever. All is one, and love is essence. Goodbye for now. Okay, so thank you everybody for all of your questions tonight. We had a really great amount of people chatting on the chat room. I really appreciate that. And we'll definitely look into getting some more events happening for free here on YouTube, maybe once a month in that way. But again, I just remind everybody, check out newearthacademy.online. There's some really great offers there. There's going to be monthly classrooms that are going to be happening there as well too. And there's all kinds of amazing videos in the video library. I'm also going to be doing some interviews very soon with some other fellow experts and teachers across the internet. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And thank you everybody for all your time tonight and being here with me. And I will speak to you again very, very soon. Or rather, in another perspective of the now. Take care everybody. Much love. Namaste. Have a good evening.